We'll just give folks another minute or two. I think we are expecting a couple more folks. So just a reminder, we'll get started in the next minute or two. You can see the information on the screen there about recording and where to find the Q&A. We'll give it one more minute and then I will get rolling with our next slide. Okay, well, I'm going to kick off our very first session of our first ever summer sustainability series. Just wanted to thank everyone for attending. I expect some other folks to be joining in the next couple minutes. I think you've all heard this already, but just wanted to remind everyone that our session will be recorded and that's so we can capture all this great info and have it accessible on our website for later. There is a Q&A button at the bottom. If you hover over the bottom buttons, you'll see a blue circle that says Q&A. You can type in your questions at any time, and we'll address those questions at several points in the session. If we could just quickly go to our next slide, I wanted to remind folks that this is the first of 9 webinars in our series. Hopefully you've looked at some of the others, maybe you've registered already, but plenty of time for to register for these next 8. They're not quite weekly, it's a couple times a month, and we're really looking forward to kicking this off this evening. And I am going to pass it over to our moderator, Barbara Lochi, and we can move on to the next slide. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Very excited about this first session of our webinar series. My name is Barbara Lochi. I have been working for the city of Chula Vista for 6 years. That's me in the picture in one of our scavenger hunts. I work mostly on energy efficiency and alternative transportation outreach programs. Welcome. And this is one of the programs that are funded by the city because we have approved our last version of the climate action. We have been working on fulfilling the plan, but there are some aspects of our work that call for participating to community events and visiting businesses and residents. Because of the current situation with the COVID-19, we have decided to work virtually and still promote our programs and stay in touch with the community. This is the first seminar, as Colleen has already said, and it's a series that will touch on all aspects of sustainability, CAP implementation, and much more. So thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, as Colleen already said, please make sure you use the Q&A feature. Next slide. I'm very excited to introduce Sylvie Fonsec. She's our first presenter. She is the programs director at the San Diego Bicycle Coalition, and she has an extensive background for sure. She has worked as an outdoor educator since 2005. Her background as a team building facilitator and instructor at Cornell University led her to bicycles. And in 2008, she started working as a part-time bike mechanic. Sylvie has led bike tours all over the United States, worked in shops and bike collectives, and taught. She worked as a bike tour guide and e-bike mechanic in New Zealand for 3 years. Upon returning to the United States, she started V-Cycle, a mobile bike maintenance workshop for women and LGBTQI identifying folks. She moved to San Diego in 2018 and joined the San Diego County Bicycle Coalition in 2019. She's going to speak to us about picking a bicycle and fitting it to our needs and size. So without further ado, here is Sylvie. Next slide, please.
Hi, thank you so much. Well, I've, like Barbara said, been with the Bike Coalition since 2019, but I've had kind of a lifelong love of bicycles, and that's dictated a lot of what I have done. So I'm going to be talking about bike fitting. I think it's an essential piece of getting people feeling confident enough to bike often. And the mission of the Bike Coalition is, as you can see, to be kind of the, the voice of San Diego County cyclists. We do a lot of education as well as advocacy, and we put on community events just to get more people feeling confident cycling in San Diego, so that hopefully someday this can be an amazingly accessible bike city. Okay, next slide. So let's just dive into bike fitting. I think to a lot of people, this is an advanced skill that you wouldn't be getting into as a new cyclist, but I think components of bike fitting have to do with all aspects of cycling. So what we'll talk about is bike lingo. We'll also look at how to adjust a bike to fit someone's unique body. We'll talk about saddles, because saddles do not come as a one-size-fits-all thing, and finding that saddle that suits you can make biking something you actually want to do constantly instead of kind of a pain in the butt. And finally, we'll talk about what else besides just adjusting the bike you can do to feel confident going long distances. And to me, long distances is anything beyond, a couple miles. So essentially with bike lingo, we have two components. We've got the components of the bicycle itself. And the value of knowing that is the chance to kind of boost confidence, giving you just the tools you need to go into a bike shop and actually explain, what you need, what doesn't feel good, what to change. Next slide. So I want to give people just a little bit of a challenge to get going. So you can follow along at home just by kind of pointing to the pieces on the bike as they come up. So you might see this list down the side, but this is the most essential components of the bike that you'll need to know, and we'll be talking about these with fitting. So the saddle, usually an easy one. Next is going to be the seat tube. That's the piece of the frame connecting that actually the seat post slides into. Handlebars, and then the stem. Stem is this extension that'll change the distance between, you sitting on the saddle and kind of reaching out. The top tube is all kind of tied into that same system. This is a piece of the geometry. Pedals, the cranks connected to the pedals, and then finally the wheel. Excellent. Next slide. So that was the bits of the bike. This is now the lingo you need to know about basic fitting. So one of the sizes and components of bike fit that people will want to know is someone's standover height. This is when you stand on top of the bike, basically how tall it is, so the size. You also have the reach, which is as you lean out to hold on to the bike and steer. And then finally, the wheelbase is a significant thing to take into account. If anyone's been on a bike that, is kind of small and compact, you might notice that when you pedal, you constantly kick the wheel if you move it at all. That might be because you have a pretty, small wheelbase. And then as an opposite, if you look up at this tandem bicycle that has a huge wheelbase, it's got a lot of space between the two wheels. And that'll change how the bike feels, not only to pedal it and kind of move with it and control it, but also how it's like what it's best suited to do. So as we get into bike fitting, I like to begin just by saying that, each individual has a totally unique body. So obviously bikes don't come in one size fits all. You can get a whole bunch of sizes and shapes and styles. And then beyond that, because we all have unique bodies, a lot of bikes need to be adjusted to actually fit the specific needs that we've got. Okay, next slide. So To begin with, basic bike fitting is how do you choose the size bike you need? This is something to think about if you want to buy a used bike, if you plan to walk into a shop and get a new bike, if someone is going to lend you a bike. So on the left, you'll see this woman is standing atop a small bike. And one indication of that is these two places, the space that she has between her body and the top. So that top piece of the frame we just looked at. And the second thing is you look down this woman's feet, she's able to stand flat-footed. So she's not making any body contact with the bicycle. If you look all the way at the opposite end, on that big bike, she can't stand flat-footed, and she actually has, her body is resting on the top tube. So that is definitely not a place that you want to be in, because anytime you come off the saddle, it means, you'll be basically slamming into that top tube. So if you kind of look at the middle images, medium is, about the size this individual should be on. So then the quiz question is, what about this? Do you think she fits on this bike? And if people want to use the chat to communicate and ask questions, that's totally fine. I will kind of ask questions and you won't have an ability to respond to me, but you can talk out loud at home if you want. Okay, next slide. So a lot of times if you call into a bike shop and say, hey, I'm looking to buy a new bike, they'll ask for your height and they'll want to use that to decide what size bike you need. So the height is definitely a component of picking the size bike, but way more important than height is inseam. So that's that actually inside leg length. And as you saw, and again in this image in the middle, this woman's inseam is going to dictate, how she actually fits on that bike. And as a good example in my life, I have pretty long legs, but I'm only 5'5". But because of that, I tend to fit on kind of big bikes because of my long legs. I know someone who's 6 foot tall and he's the exact same length legs as me. And so we actually fit on the same size bikes, but we need to make unique modifications to have those bikes, fit the unique bodies that we have. So despite, bike shops usually wanting to ask someone's height and then deciding which bike based on that, if you know your inseam, that'll give you a lot better sense of what size bike you want to be on as you go about buying a new bike, a used bike. So the second thing is saddle height and position. So if you look at these two guys biking, the guy closest to us has his leg almost fully extended. This can be, it takes a bit of confidence to be able to get the saddle up high enough that you can get to full leg extension when you get to the bottom of the pedal stroke. But the benefit of that is that you actually use, the leg muscles that have been designed to most effectively pedal a bike. You use them more effectively and efficiently. So a lot of people will get in the habit of having the saddle pretty low so that anytime they stop at a stoplight, they can put both feet down flat and balance. The benefit of that is definitely that it does allow you to stay balanced. It allows you to get back on the bike kind of easily, but it's going to mean that you won't have the pedal quite high enough to really use the leg muscles you have effectively. So with time, you'll get a lot of kind of possibly knee and definitely, thigh pain just by not getting to full extension as you pedal. And so that skill of kind of getting on and off the saddle efficiently when you get to stoplights is something that you might need to, practice at home and develop with time, but eventually being able to get the saddle up to this ideal height is going to be a piece of those fittings and adjustments that make biking kind of feel good and allow you to go long distances. Last thing on this page is if you look all the way to the left, we can just go back one slide. The way that someone's, knee and ball of the foot line up with the pedal and the middle of the pedal, the axle, is also going to be a key piece of being able to feel good going long distances. And we'll talk about kind of how to make adjustments that might change that. But if you've noticed you feel knee pain sometimes when you bike, it could be that when you push down in that, 3 o'clock foot position, you don't have your knee bone lined up effectively with the ball of the foot and the pedal axle. Okay, next slide. This will just be a quick one. People often want to ask about, clipless pedals or toe cages or just flat pedals that you push on, you don't have to connect into. And I wouldn't, suggest any one thing, but the benefit of the toe cages and the clipless pedals is that, as you can see in this image again, your foot will always be pushing on the pedal. in the exact same place and in the place it needs to be. And with a platform pedal, if you don't think about, how you step on that pedal, you might end up putting more of your heel on the pedal and kind of hyperextending. So it's easy enough just to keep in mind, like the ball of my foot should be in the middle of the pedal, but a clipless pedal, a cleat that connects into the pedal and connects the shoe to the pedal is an excellent way to stay connected and pedal effectively. Next slide. So step 3 on just what to look at as you make these initial adjustments is going to be the height of the handlebars and how much you lean out. So which one of these looks like you? And it's definitely, these have been, this is way beyond most people's situation, but depending on the style of the bike, you might be leaning way, 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 in front of the wheel, or you might be sitting really upright. And those two positions, will completely affect how it feels to bike and how fast you can go, which muscles you use. So in the middle, she's kind of, in an ideal position, but she's also on a specific kind of bike that makes this back, an elbow position possible. Next slide. So I've got a little activity to do with you all, and I'm going to do this too, so I might make some funny noises. I'm kind of sitting and standing. What I'd like you to do is sit on the edge of a seat, and in a moment you'll just stand up, and don't think about it too much. You just want to, stand the way that you would. So go ahead and do a quick kind of sit and stand a couple times. And now as you stand, I want you to think about how much you lean without even thinking about it. You'll be leaning just a little bit to activate the thigh muscles and stand up efficiently. So now that you've done that and you've thought about just that little bit of kind of back bend and lean that you make, I want you to see if you can stand without leaning at all. So the goal is, as if you have a fishing line like tied to the top of your head and someone's kind of yanking on it, you just want to get into like an elevated standing position without any leaning. And it might be possible if you have awesome leg muscles and you've been using COVID to get in shape and doing squats a couple times a week, this might feel easy just to stand up. But I'd imagine for most people, the easiest feeling and the kind of natural feeling is to lean just a little bit and stand and get a little bit of that momentum to get you up. So you can see in the image below also, some of these kind of back positions, these body angles that people might be in based on the kind of bike that they have. But those, the ones on the second from the left, those kind of two, that's most ideal. That's going to be closest to the position you might have, found yourself in just now doing this activity. And that's definitely going to, most effectively activate the thigh muscles instead of using, some muscles that will not be as well suited to pushing up and down. And something else you might notice is that if you sit up, completely straight and you make a pedaling motion, it actually uses a lot of ab muscle. And biking shouldn't use that much ab muscle. So some bikes will put you in a position that does utilize different muscles, and that might be a choice you make along the way based on the kind of biking you want to do. Okay, next slide. So one of the last components of these decisions about how you get a bike to feel the way you want and what might not feel good is going to be just how you hold on to the shifting mechanisms and the brake levers. And this is, it kind of explains itself, but you can see in the top images on the left, this individual's, wrist is kind of cocked and bent at an intense angle. As opposed to that bottom image, they have almost a nice straight line, down through the wrist into the hand. And it's the same way, with time, doing a push-up with really bent hands will give you kind of, wrist pain that could become an issue in the long term. So same idea, just thinking about how to get an ideal, straight wrist. It's a pretty simple thing to change the angle of the brake levers, and that can do a lot to alleviate, hand pain, tingling, numbness, and all of that hand pain usually kind of makes its way up into people's backs as well. So a couple positions just to think about at home. Thanks. So why is it an essential piece of bike safety to have a bike that fits? So what I've found with people is if a bike fits them well, they'll want to, actually go out and use it because it feels good being on it. It'll make them feel confident riding in the same way that if you get on a bike that's way too big, you'll be questioning how well you'll balance. Will you be able to safely get off the bike when you get to a stop sign? And on a bike that's too small, you might be thinking like, will I be able to get moving, fast enough to get out of the way if I need to? So confidence is a huge piece of this, just liking being on the bike. Obviously, if a bike fits you well, is sized to you well, you'll be able to control it well, which is absolutely a piece of confidence and safety. And, by liking being on the bike, you'll want to go out and keep building those skills, which makes biking feel like something you can do, consistently. Next slide. So as we dive into actually doing some bike fitting, not that you should be doing this at home just yet, because we still have a little bit of a lesson to go, but this is the basic tools that I would suggest someone, begin with. So a multi-tool, a bike multi-tool will come with a set of hexes. That's mostly what you'll be using to adjust the saddle positions. And that's, as you saw, a big piece of bike fitting. And then an adjustable wrench might be something you need based on how old the bike is. So you can see on this saddle on the bottom, it has a nut that needs to be loosened and tightened to adjust the saddle position. So seats and saddles. They come in so many shapes and sizes. Definitely not a one size fits all thing, but oftentimes someone will get a bike. It comes with the seat that it comes with. That's what they use. If it doesn't feel good, people just accept that biking doesn't feel good. But you have so many options. And so we'll get into exactly kind of how you pick some of those choices to get a saddle that actually fits the unique body that you've got. So choosing a saddle is going to be about the position you'll want to be in and how aggressive of a position that is what we call it in cycling. So how much you'll be leaning, how fast you'll be moving, what kind of distances you want to go. But the ideal is that most of your body weight and pressure is going to be on your sit bones and on the widest place in the saddle, as you can see highlighted in that left image. Those two yellow dots kind of indicate the place that most of the body, contact is happening. If you find that you get thigh chafing when you bike, might be because you have a saddle that's a little bit too wide. So you can see on the bottom, and I'll highlight this in just a second, the nose of the saddle, which is kind of the end point, you can have a bit of a variation in how quickly that, nose kind of thins out. If you'll click one last time, Yasmin, we'll get a little highlight on the saddle. Yeah, excellent. So that's the place that you might be getting thigh chafing if you don't have a saddle that's been, well shaped to the kind of body you have. So we've looked a little bit about saddle width. And in the next slide, we'll talk about actually how to identify that width. So one fun way to do this at home is with something like Play-Doh. This is homemade Play-Doh, and it's in a plastic bag. So we had someone sit on this Play-Doh, lift up both legs just a little bit to get a nice sit bone indent in the Play-Doh. And then she's just measuring the distance between those two deepest points that the sit bone made. And so with that kind of sit bone width, you can decide how wide a saddle you need. And what I think is so, helpful to think about with this is that you can't look at someone on the outside and know, what's on the inside. So someone's skeleton is often not visible based on someone's, skin and shapes. So it's difficult to, assume if someone has a big build, they should be on a big saddle. That just isn't always the case. Someone might have really narrow sit bones, and that's what you want to be, contacting the saddle, not all that skin and tissue, because by pushing too much on the skin and tissue, you'll get numbness, you'll get pain, you'll cut off blood flow. So it is all about having not a soft saddle, but a saddle that, holds you effectively by those two bones. Okay, next slide. So a lot of people don't know, but the saddle has so many ways that it can move, and this can help alleviate, pain in places. And also this can tie into what we looked at a while ago, that knee to kind of foot and ball of foot position. So the saddle not only moves up and back, it also can tilt up and it can tilt down. And all those changes, and even little tiny changes, will have a significant effect on how the bike feels. So if you tilted the saddle, like the nose down a whole lot. You might find it takes a lot of ab muscle to stay on the saddle. You might have to keep kind of pushing back on the handlebars to stay up on the saddle, and eventually that'll lead, to wrist pain and hand pain and possibly back pain. If the saddle is angled up too high, you'll also be dealing with a new set of muscles that's helping you stay on that saddle. And some of this is just, playing with it and seeing what feels good. So when it comes to making adjustments, ideally, you just do little adjustments at a time. If you want to pull the saddle up to get a good leg extension, do it slowly. Do it an inch, even half an inch at a time. If you want to make changes to any of those angles, same idea, just make one change at a time, get on the bike, see how it feels, and then change it again as needed. Next slide. So come into some of the specifics of, why you might feel some pain when you bike. To begin with, if you feel intense pain, it means you got to change something pretty immediately. A little bit of achiness, soreness, that's going to be acceptable. That'll make sense, especially if, maybe you haven't kind of built up to a long ride, maybe you haven't been on the bike in a while. But any kind of, intense acute pain is something to really stop and look at and change. So to a lot of people that I've talked to, it's painful to sit on the saddle. And so they just accept that biking doesn't feel good and they don't bike as long distances. If something on the bike is making you feel that, reticent to get on and do it, that's something that should be looked at and changed and not just accepted as, well, that's just what biking is like. Next slide. So I don't want to spend too long on these, but people tend to love this slide because this is the place you get to look at these associations. If you have numb hands, what kind of adjustments might you make to change that? The big takeaway is going to be, anything you adjust, you want to adjust one place at a time. So you wouldn't want to dive in and change the saddle and the handlebars and the grips you have. You'd want to just switch one thing at a time, see if that helps, and then move on to the next thing. And I do have this page and the next page in a link that you can follow on the Bike Coalition's website. So down at the bottom, you can see that link and you'll be able to see these images. And as you, at home begin making adjustments, you can kind of tune into this and say, okay, this is the place I'm feeling pain. This is the stuff I want to look at adjusting. So with all that said, this is an advanced skill that people do. Some basic adjusting is excellent to know how to do at home, but sometimes, going to a professional to get a bike fit is going to be the best like tool you can take advantage of, especially with COVID. I know a lot of bike shops have been beyond busy and it's taking people weeks to get things fixed. Something else I just want to point out about getting a bike fit is that oftentimes you'll get a bike fitting done, and then as you use that bike more often because it feels good, you will change and you'll adapt to the fitting that was done. And so you might get more leg and hip flexibility, back flexibility. You might build muscle in new places. And so a bike fitting is not something that's kind of one and done. You'll get a bike fit, you will adjust and adapt along with that fitting, and then you might need to go back again and make small adjustments and do additional, make additional changes to how the bike fits you. So if you've made a lot of adjustments to the shape of the bike, maybe you've changed out some components, switched out the saddle, you've changed how high it is, the next thing that might be something to look at is, what you bike in, because that's going to affect how you feel on the bike. And you have so many options. You've got gloves to help maybe with, aching hands, neck, and back. That little bit of padding in the hands can be huge. You've got, padded bike clothing as well as lightweight, wicking bike clothing, especially in the heat in San Diego. Having something that's, designed to be used in an athletic situation can feel really good instead of, biking in a cotton tee. And with that said, I often bike in cutoff jeans and a cotton tee because I've got a saddle that I love, so I don't get, much pain when I'm biking on it. And I'm just not someone who gets that sweaty, so I kind of like my cool cotton tees. So you can bike in anything, but knowing that some things will feel, good to bike in because they've been designed to be used to bike in. The last thing you'll see on this slide is shoes. People will just kind of hop on a bike sometimes and go down to the beach in flip-flops, which is totally fine. You'll also find that by having stiff shoes when you pedal, the whole foot will be pushing on the pedal instead of the foot kind of bending around the pedal. So if you get foot pain, foot numbness, anything like that, you might have a shoe that's just not quite stiff enough to be biking long distances. Okay, coming to the last slides. So beyond the bike fitting, the clothing options, those adjustments you might make on a day-to-day basis, the way that you actually bike and what you do kind of leading up to biking will also affect, how it feels and your willingness to bike long distances. So something people might want to look at changing also is, the cadence, how quickly you pedal. Ideally, if you kind of spin both hands to act this out, as if you have hands instead of feet, you want to be moving at about 70 to 90 revolutions a minute. So that's, one full pedal rotation almost each second, which is kind of amazingly fast, which also means that you'll have to be thinking about how you shift the bike, how you change the gears so that you can keep pedaling at that fast cadence. You might also want to think about, the mileage you do. So if you haven't been on a bike in a couple months and you suddenly jump back in and decide you want to go, 50 miles one weekend, that's going to have effects as well. So building up to that long mileage, making a point of, doing something like yoga, stretching, building specific muscles to assist you before and, following rides will also be something that helps kind of mitigate the usual achiness you might feel by biking. Okay. I'd love to give people a chance to ask questions. I also wanted to do just one shout out at the end of this. Because of COVID, one of the things the Bike Coalition has done to get more people cycling in San Diego, and we've seen this amazing boost in cycling. So we've teamed up with Love to Ride, which is an online platform. And by going to the website and signing up for free, you build a profile and you can log rides you do. You can invite people to join with you. You can challenge them. So we have a month-long challenge coming up. And you can even link up existing apps you have. Like if you use Strava, Map My Ride, anything like that, you can just attach it to your Love to Ride profile. And anytime you go out, it'll log it. But it's not about biking fast. It's not about biking long distances. It's just about, giving people more incentive to get on bikes and making it fun, challenging, a little bit competitive. So we'll have a lot of really cool prizes that'll be available to individuals as well as companies that sign up and compete in this challenge. So that's just lovetoride.net/San Diego County. And again, it's totally free to join. It's a lot of fun and it's an amazing space to connect people and just get kind of more info like this. So the Bike Coalition is posting all of its educational classes on this website too. So if you've liked this and you want to tune into some additional classes about, bike yoga, bike fitting, bike safety, you'll be able to find all of that on that Love to Ride page also. Okay, thank you all so much.
All right, thank you, Sylvie. So we do have 3 questions, or actually 2 questions and 1 comment that came in. The first is from Corey. Would any of this be different for an electric bike?
That's such a good question. Most of this is going to be exactly the same thing. One of the distinctions is, because of the weight of an electric bike, you might find that some components get like tightened and attached in, slightly different ways. So I showed you those 2 options, of tools you can use. You've got the multi-tool with hexes on it, and then possibly an adjustable wrench. I find that with e-bikes, they just have so much power and kind of torque behind them that sometimes, the exact components and things don't quite look the same. But when it comes to, the seat height and the reach and the handlebars and all that, it is all like pretty, interchangeable and adjustable in a lot of the same ways. Good question.
Great, thank you. Second question, do you recommend drop handlebars for daily commuters, such as biking several miles to schools, or is it just a personal preference?
That's also an excellent question. So yeah, kind of like saddles, they make so many styles of handlebars, and it is going to come down to what you, feel most confident on and like using. I find with myself, I have a bike that has drop handlebars, and I spend a lot of time holding on to the top of them as if it is like a flat bar. I also spend a lot of time with my hands like on the hoods of the brakes if I want to get my hands in a nice, wide position. I don't go down into the drops too often, which is totally fine. Like, it's still a great city bike, even if I don't take advantage of all the hand positions. What I find is some people want to have lots of hand positions to move between. And so I think it's more important to think about, if you've consistently been feeling hand pain, elbow pain, neck pain, you might want to look into a different style of handlebar that's going to give you options and positions. They make little extensions you can put on the side of the handlebar, which will help kind of raise you up by a couple of inches. You can take those same extensions and lean them kind of down at an angle, and that'll help extend you out over the bike. So yeah, it's a bit more about, what positions you want to be riding in and what handlebar is going to allow you to get into all those positions.
Great. And I apologize. That question was from Waldo. Thank you for interacting with us. And then the last thing was just a comment from Carolyn. Excellent detailed information and effective slides. It's a great resource. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Sylvie, this was great information. Just a reminder for anybody who joined us later, you can ask questions using the chat box feature at the bottom of your screen. So the next presenter, another person I have the pleasure to work with. Frank Rivera is the principal civil engineer with the Engineering and Capital Projects Department at the City of Chula Vista. Since starting work while in college as an engineering intern, he has been with the city for 36 years in various positions, assessment, districts, and facility financing. I think he is not muted. Can you please mute yourselves? Frank currently supervises and manages the City of Chula Vista Capital Improvement Program, infrastructure grants, drainage and wastewater engineering functions, and master plans for drainage, bicycle and pedestrian improvements on and wastewater. Part of his duties are also to oversee the timely use of local, state, and federal funds on projects and to ensure that drainage, transportation, and wastewater needs are planned for and constructed by the time they're needed. He also works with our regional partners at Caltrans and Sandag so that any regional project with Chula Vista or South Bay has our input, meaning our as the City of Chula Vista. Frank is an avid cyclist, and here is a picture of him of a bike ride with his wife and friends. He and his wife are on a classic 1977 Schwinn Twin Deluxe. I hope I said it right. Model tandem bicycle in the rare flamingo pink color. Fully functional bike after all these years. Some of the awards the city has won thanks to his work are American Public Works Association Outstanding Service in a Public Agency in 2015, San Diego County Bike Coalition Public Partner of the Year Golden Gear Award in 2017, and Who's Who Among American Public Agencies in 2019. And so here is Frank's presentation, and he will talk about where the city stands as far as projects and what we're looking into the future. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Next slide. You can. We just recently completed one of our master plans that had quite a bit of public input, and we had a lot of input provided by public meetings we attended, like Earth Day, the Harbor Festival, and we had an electronic survey, and it was an update to our pedestrian master plan and our bicycle master plan, and it's called the Active Transportation Plan. And it's easily Googled, just Google Chula Vista ATP, and you'll get to the page right away, and it's kind of like the first thing that shows up. So it's very easy to access the document. In the document, what we did is we looked at the existing conditions, a little bit about the community, our demographics, the where the needs are for pedestrians, where the needs are for bicyclists, and about transit and how we kind of connect all of that. We also looked at the opportunities and constraints in it, and there's lots of figures and tables in that document that really kind of get a sense of what the city's vision is for the next, hopefully not the next decade, but as we move forward. If you go to the next slide, then what this starts showing is one of the projects that over the last few years, more and more of the needs for us on Broadway were brought to light based on the number of people using Broadway as a biking corridor and the number of pedestrians on that street. That's our commercial corridor. And the project is called Bike Lanes on Broadway. We got a state grant to help us implement bike lanes on Broadway. But as those of you who are aware of Broadway, the north end, the middle, and the south end each have their own distinctive characteristics. And the solution that we ultimately decided on covers each of these areas in the best way possible for all users. So what we did is we looked at having a bike route that is there today, but the public wasn't necessarily comfortable in riding their bikes on the street, and we'd have them riding on the sidewalks, and that conflicts with pedestrians using the sidewalks. So we did feel that we had to go with the bike lanes to kind of encourage more use of the street. The street is wide enough to accommodate the bike lanes. And what you see highlighted is just about 4 miles in length from C Street to Main Street. And probably about 5 years ago, from Main Street south to the Otay River, we did that project to put curb gutter, sidewalk, and bike lanes. So this will connect the entire Broadway corridor within Chula Vista. We looked at narrowing travel lanes. We looked at what we had in the middle of the street, south of L Street. We have a raised landscape median. And we also looked at the on-street parking needs throughout the corridor. Next slide. So the north section of Broadway is going to be implemented with a road diet. And what a road diet means is that the number of travel lanes that we have will get reduced. And then that portion of the roadway that used to have travel lanes sort of gets reapportioned out so that the other users of the roadway can take advantage of that lane, those lanes that we eliminated. So from C Street to G Street, we are going to use the extra space, and then everything gets restriped so that we have a bicycle buffer lane, which is that 3-foot wide crosshatched area that's between the travel lane and the bike lane. And then the middle of the street is going to be a 14-foot wide center left turn lane, so people can turn in there and then they wait for their opportunity to turn left into a driveway or onto the side street, or when they exit a driveway or side street and they want to make their left turn, they would go out into the middle of the street and wait for their gap to then merge over into the travel lane. On-street parking will be retained because the businesses don't really have enough parking space off the street. And so there's a lot of small, what we'd call mom and pop businesses at that end. And the large parking lots are few and far between. So the decision was made that with the traffic volumes being low enough and the off-street parking not necessarily covering all the needs, then this is the cross-section that we approved. And it did get approved. The whole Bike Lanes on Broadway project went through our Traffic Safety Commission, the Sustainability Commission, and also the City Council. Next slide. The middle, so then now here we go, G Street to L Street, which is the middle section. The traffic volumes start getting high in this area that we need to maintain 4 lanes of traffic, but we reduced them down to 11-foot wide travel lanes. This Broadway is a truck route. It is a transit corridor with the MTS 932 line, which is very busy. And we still needed the on-street squeeze everything in there. The center left turn lane now is at its minimum width of 10 feet because remember, this is a commercial corridor. So if a truck is out there, it's about 8.5, 9 feet wide, plus the rear view mirrors that stick out. And that's if the truck driver's got it like centered on that turn lane. So it is tight, but that's what we have there to be able to provide a 5-foot wide bike lane and the parking lanes at 8 feet. Next slide. The south end of Broadway was a section that from L Street south to Main Street that the city annexed from the County of San Diego in 1985. When we annexed Broadway, we had the overhead electrical lines, we had an asphalt center median on the roadway there, and areas where we needed curb gutter and sidewalk to be completed. As we went through and sort of reconstructed that area, we redid the raised medians to the stamped concrete with the landscaping, and they're still in pretty good shape, and we weren't going to go in with this grant. There wasn't enough money for us to try anything different. We worked with what we had. But as I mentioned initially about the parking study that was done as part of the Bike Lanes on Broadway project, we found that there's enough off-street parking for all the businesses from L Street down to Main Street, except one, which is a auto repair business, but they do have the ability to park across the street, which is a side street, or around the corner. And so when we brought that up, it wasn't like a extreme hardship that it was just that one business, but they did have the opportunity to have adjacent or nearby on-street parking. So the decision was made that no on-street parking is going to be allowed from L Street down to Main Street. What that does is we keep the existing raised median. The travel lanes are 11-foot wide or 12 feet, depending, because the street does vary a little bit. And we do have a 5-foot wide lane with a 4-foot buffer. And so this is the contractor at this point in time has been working on the signal work and the fiber optic cabling and some pavement work on there, but the street gets resurfaced and then the striping goes on top, and we expect that the work will be completed in a couple of months. Next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what happens off the public roadway system. We are trying also to sort of formalize the trails that we have in the city and clearly identify those trails that work best for the mountain bikers, and also acknowledge that on trails that we have, there are many users. We have hikers, bikers, joggers, people who like to take their exercise and walk their pets. And so there's a lot of different users. But when it comes to the mountain biking, you kind of want, the trails that kind of go through an area that they're challenging, but also that they respect the environmental sensitivity that we may have in certain areas. And that's what the, on the legend at the bottom, MSCP, that's a multi-species conservation plan, open space preserve area. Those are areas where we have defined areas with sensitive habitat. And so what we're trying to do is we acknowledge and we have accepted that there are trails that will remain open, but there are other areas where trails have been pioneered that we're going to be discouraging users from that. And so that the trails that we do want the users to be on will be more maintained, the vegetation cleared back, and we'll work on getting some signage and trail markers in that area. We first started looking at Rice Canyon. We're intent to kind of go through the entire city, but this one's a nice centralized loop system. And we felt that this one would be, since it's kind of geographically the center of the city, we felt, well, let's start with this one first, and then we'll go from there. So the work just started on it maybe about a month to 2 months ago, where we've been having city staff meetings on sort of the issues. We've met with the resource agencies to kind of get their idea on kind of what we're trying to do here. So you'll be hearing more about the trail network and the biking trail network in Chula Vista in the months to come. Next slide. So now we're getting into sort of our highest priority needs for the city as we pursue outside funding. A lot of the work that the city does, we look at our master plans to tell us where we need to spend our money and where the priority is based on public input, statistics, collision history, grant criteria. Wherever we can get outside money into the community, we're always looking. And in this particular case, here's an interesting statistic regarding the Bayshore Bikeway. That's a 24-mile loop around San Diego Bay. Ultimately, it's all going to be a bike path. Most of the bike path system is in place. In Chula Vista, if you go to the Chula Vista ATP, the bicycle section of it shows that through Chula Vista along the west of I-5 area, we're going to have a bike path that goes generally along just the west side of Bay Boulevard, but there's also going to be a segment that loops over west towards the bay to kind of get you to go along the water's edge as close as possible. So ultimately, what ends up happening is the vision for the bayfront area has a series of sort of interlocking loops with the bike path that could be used for people to just say ride around the bay and do laps. Maybe we'll have future events where we have events that you can do laps in around San Diego, around the bayfront area of Chula Vista. So what's happening though is as part of that bayfront getting redeveloped, we need to have the bike path put in at the very least from E Street to Lagoon Drive, which is kind of the extension of F Street. Because as the hotel and convention center and the residential towers get under construction on the bayfront and open up in a couple of years, Bay Boulevard, which has the bike lanes, the segment from E Street to Lagoon Drive, the traffic mitigation measure for the increased traffic that'll go into the bayfront requires that the bike lanes be removed from Bay Boulevard, only from E Street to Lagoon. South of Lagoon Drive, the bike lanes would stay on Bay Boulevard, but we'd still have a goal to get a bike path put in west of Bay Boulevard. So what we're doing is we're going to the city council in a couple of weeks to ask them to grant us permission to submit a grant to the Caltrans Active Transportation Program to get a bike path established here on Bay Boulevard or just west of Bay Boulevard. We've worked with the rail corridor people at San Diego MTS, and they support the idea. And we're also doing another grant application, which is the F Street corridor. As you barely see there in the picture, the intersection of F Street, Lagoon Drive, and Bay Boulevard is going to be a roundabout. And then west of that roundabout on F Street, we would have a bike path, a one-way bike path on each side of the street, a promenade across the freeway on the old freight railroad bridge, and a lot of other improvements. So we're going to be presenting those two grant applications to the City Council in the coming weeks. Next slide. So here then is the view. It's between the two asterisks. That's what the bike grant application is for us to get the preliminary engineering and environmental done. And then we would seek the construction funding after that, maybe through SANDAG or other means. Next slide. And then here's a view of today's situation with the arrows at the bottom, kind of pointing what the bicyclists have to do. Those are the green arrows. And the yellow is sort of the options of what we're looking to do is to have the bike path go over to the right. The rail corridor is the preferred one since it's less of an offset. That's where the Bayshore Bikeway master plan kind of looked at us going. But we also have the San Diego Gas and Electric corridor where that's just even to the west a little bit more, that's sort of the other option. So we're looking at both right now, and we'll see as we get into the project where we ultimately go with the ultimate alignment. Next slide. Now, this project is one that's very interesting in the southwest part of the city. Palomar Street from I-5 to Broadway and everything in that area is very, very busy. What happens kind of halfway through that corridor is that we have the light rail system, railroad tracks that cross Palomar Street right near the intersection of Industrial Boulevard. We have this location as the highest need location to separate the train from the cars and the pedestrians and the bicyclists in San Diego County. And so what we've done is we finished in January the environmental project approval for grade separating the railroad track corridor because it's also used by freight. And the design concept that you see there shows in the gray background on the roadway, that's everything that the grade has to change or get reconstructed. Palomar will go underneath the railroad tracks and underneath Industrial Boulevard. Industrial Boulevard and Palomar will not be an intersection anymore, but we are providing bike lanes on Palomar Street. And at the southwest corner, you see sort of like the yellow boxes. That's a shopping center that just got approved late last year from the Planning Commission. They're going to have a big box grocery store and a couple of smaller buildings that they can split up into retail, commercial, restaurants. And just to the north of those three small buildings, there's a multi-purpose pathway that takes you off of Palomar Street up over to Industrial Boulevard. And that little yellow diamond in the middle of the street of Industrial is a pedestrian bicycle hawk signal. So that will allow people to cross at that location. The trolley tracks and the station, the pedestrians will have their own bridge to cross on the east side of the railroad tracks. And you can see that little sidewalk connection over to the winding road that we're just calling Oxford Connector for now. But there's a lot of people that take that trolley and then they walk north towards the shopping or the County of San Diego Health Services building. So the design will take about 2 years from now. We're already funded for the design. And then we expect that construction will probably begin close to 3 years from now. And 5 years from now, we expect that the work would be completed. So that's the timeline on this particular project. Next slide. So with that, if anybody has any questions.
Hey, Frank, thank you. So there are 3 questions. 2 of them are from Corey. The first one is there an opportunity to add off-street parking like there is near 3rd Avenue? And I believe that's for Broadway.
Broadway to add off-street parking? Well, what I guess for Broadway off-street parking, the city does not own any parking lots. And so you have to kind of look at what opportunities we may have. It may be in some instances what we did on some streets where we did construction projects near the trolley at H and Broadway. We actually converted some of the through streets as a temporary measure because we took parking away from an apartment complex on a temporary basis while we did work along their carports in the back. we turned Woodlawn Avenue, I think it was, or Woodlawn or Oaklawn, we turned it into a temporary one-way street where it was parallel parking on one side of the street and angle parking on the other. And the people, after a while, when we finished construction, we had people say, leave it alone. You know, we like it like that because it did have like a traffic calming effect, but it also provided more parking for those apartments. So it could be an issue that could be brought up. I'm sure that as we look for ways to do traffic calming, that this is kind of like a win-win situation as people are allowed to do accessory dwelling units. I think if we start getting like that. Next question.
So second question, Corey asks, is there any plans for slow streets or other temporary expansions of bike paths due to COVID limitations?
The city did get a slow streets grant. And my understanding is that Third Avenue up by East Street to maybe Parkway by the by Labella's Pizza, that's the area that's been looked at to have that, sort of like when we had the Ciclovista event a couple of years ago. And so I think the answer is yes. I just don't have all the specifics on it. And I'm sure that we will be pushing that information out.
Okay, so third question comes from Waldo. What are some ways that the city will be promoting these new bike lanes?
Well, the bike lanes on Broadway, we do have a grant from Sandag. Because of COVID, all the grants for this year got continued till next year. Next year, between March and June, we will be having the bike lanes on Broadway, I guess, ribbon cutting event. And we have had bicycle warehouse on Main Street. They said they will be participating. And so we do expect that we're going to have a big event on that day. And our intent is that you'll be able to cycle the full 4 miles south, 4 miles north. And so it'll be an 8-mile loop. If you go all the way down the Otay River and back, it's probably about 8.5 miles. And one of the thoughts we were thinking was that we would have the staging area kind of at the Chula Vista Shopping Center by the J.C. Penney, since that's kind of a good meeting place in the middle. But we're working on the logistics, but we've got time. And those are the types of events where we always do media blasts. And so you'll see that on the TV news and other places where the city announces, makes their major announcements. So stay tuned for that.
We do have a last question that came in from Matthew, but I think we can maybe answer that one after, if we have time. Barbara?
Yep. Thank you, Frank.
You're welcome.
That was good information. Yes, thank you. So looking ahead, as Frank mentioned, the city was awarded a Sandag Go by Bike grant multiple times over the years. The grant is awarded to local governments who apply and propose a plan to work on outreach events and educating the public about bicycling. City staff, we're always excited to participate and draft a plan for the year. And this is a picture from last year's Bike to Work Day, Ron Rittard and an owl from the Living Coast Discovery Center, the pit stop for Bike to Work Day. We hosted with the Living Coast and also UTC Aerospace, which has changed its name, I think. So this year, the city was awarded the grant once again and planned several fun events, such as a lunch and learn and a bike ride along Broadway, which Frank just mentioned, on the new bike lanes. There was going to be a celebration. So everything has postponed since all the events have been canceled due to the pandemic. So our Go by Bike activities are postponed to next year. Please stay tuned. Make sure that you follow our social media channels. We are at Chula Vista Clean on Facebook and Instagram. And you can also email me. My email will be on the last slide so that I can add you to the interest list and I can communicate with you about our biking events. And we always have 2 events. Next slide, please. So we always have 2 events happening at our South Bay Earth Day Fair, which happens usually the first Saturday, second Saturday of April. And it is the Kids Bicycle Rodeo and a family ride from the Plaza Bonita Mall on the bike path all the way to the event. And the city provides a free bicycle valet for everybody that participates to this ride, but also who wants to come to the event with their bicycle and they just, want to bike and in a safe spot and enjoy the event and walk through. So please stay tuned again because we really like to provide these services to the city, to the residents, and we're looking forward to starting again. Thank you. And if you have any questions, please use the chat box.
Excellent. Well, just wanted to remind folks that I think the next slide has all the remaining webinars in the series. So just thanks again to our panel, all the staff that were helping on this call and all those amazing questions from everyone. If there was something we weren't able to answer, you can reach out to us and we can help get those last questions answered. But we do hope to see you on an upcoming webinar later this summer. And thanks again.